A dying ember resistance flickered beneath the Empire's steel grip, a final whisper of defiance before extinction. Earth, once a thriving beacon of human ambition, had been reduced to a nameless colony under the Galactic Empire's rule. Its history was erased, its people mere laborers in a system that devoured worlds without remorse. Yet, in the shadows, a rebellion stirred, holding on to a single fragile hope. One name whispered through generations like an unfulfilled prophecy: General Adrian Kane. But he was long gone. At the Empire's zenith, they had feared only one man, and rather than risk his execution becoming a rallying cry, they chose a different fate for him. He had been sealed away, entombed in stasis deep within forgotten wastelands of Earth, a relic buried beneath time and the Empire's indifference. They had thought him a legend best left undisturbed. They were wrong. The execution that changed everything. Lena Valdez stood at the edge of the execution platform, her hands bound, her gaze unwavering. The sky above was a deep, artificial crimson, a reflection of the Empire's iron will. A crowd had gathered below, their faces hollow, their spirits dulled by decades of subjugation. High General Varric, clad in imposing obsidian armor, the Empire's elite, observer with a detached curiosity. He had seen countless rebels meet their end, each believing themselves to be the one who would inspire an uprising. None had. "This is the fate of all who defy the Empire," he announced, his voice carrying over the silent masses. "Your cause is nothing but dust beneath our feet." Lena, bloody but unbroken, managed a smirk. "The Empire should be careful of the dust it steps on. Sometimes it hides a storm." Varric sighed. He had heard enough. A signal was given. The executioner, a towering Brutus soldier, raised his plasma blade, its blue glow reflecting off the polished steel of the platform. The blade swung downward, and the ground trembled. A deep, resonant hum filled the air, a frequency so low it rattled the bones of all present. Far beneath the execution site, in the ancient ruins long abandoned by the Empire, something had awakened. Systems dormant for over a century flickered to life. A security failsafe, embedded within the genetic markers of Earth's last line of defense, had been triggered. Lena's blood had been the key. She fell before she could see the chaos she had set in motion. But her death was no longer just another act of oppression. It was the spark that would ignite a storm. The awakening. Miles away, in a desolate wasteland covered in the skeletal remains of a lost civilization, the earth cracked. A deep rumbling shook the landscape as an underground structure, once thought to be ruins, came alive with pulsating energy. Inside a long-forgotten chamber, an ancient stasis pod hissed, releasing a dense cloud of cryogenic vapor. The dim glow of failing monitors reflected off the metallic surface of a lone figure encased within. Tubes disconnected, gears screeched, and then, with final mechanical gasp, the pod's reinforced doors slid open. A man collapsed forward, his body heaving as he took his first breath in a century. General Adrian Kane did not wake as a hero reborn. He woke as a soldier ripped from time, his mind trapped between past and present, between battles fought and those yet to come. His muscles, though weak from stasis, remembered war. His mind, though clouded, recalled only one truth. The Empire had taken everything. Memories surged. The last stand of Earth's armies. The decision enter stasis rather than surrender. The knowledge that one day he might be needed again. That day had come. He staggered to his feet, his breath ragged. He was in an underground facility, its design unmistakably human, though the dust of years coated every surface. Screens flickered to life, feeding him fragmented reports of Earth's current state. Oppression, rebellion. The name Lena Valdez flashed before him. He did not know her, yet something in his chest tightened at the sight of her final moments. Her execution broadcast across the planet as a warning. He saw her eyes, defiant to the end, and in them, he saw a reflection of his own past battles, of the countless soldiers who had died under his command, believing in a world free from the Empire's grasp. Kane clenched his fists. The Empire had not just taken a life. They had awakened a ghost. The first step toward war. Above, the Empire had begun its standard sweep of the disturbance. Patrol ships hovered, Scanning the area for potential rebel activity, they found something far worse. A single figure emerged from the ruins. Adrian Kane, clad in the tattered remains of a uniform that had not seen sunlight in 100 years, stepped forward. His movements were slow, deliberate. His body, though weakened, still carried the weight of a warrior forged in the crucible of war. His expression was unreadable, but his eyes, those held the storm. The first soldier to spot him hesitated. "Identify yourself," the trooper barked, weapon raised. Kane did not respond. He was taking in the world. The scent of burned earth, the sight of a planet stripped of its former glory. He had fought to protect this place once. He had buried friends in its soil. And now, the enemy still stood, still breathing, still ruling. A slow breath, a pulse of memory. The battlefield calling. He moved. Before the trooper could react, Kane was upon him, his hands twisting the weapon aside, his knees slamming into armor. A single strike, efficient and merciless, sent the soldier crumpling. Another turned to fire. Kane seized his wrist, redirected the shot, and dropped him with a precise blow to the throat. Panic spread among the remaining soldiers. They fired wildly, but Kane was already gone, slipping into the ruins like a phantom. By the time reinforcement arrived, all they found were the remains of their fallen men, and a message carved into the metallic ruins. "Earth is not dead." A storm on the horizon. The news spread quickly. Whispers of Kane's return reached the underbelly of the rebellion, turning quiet murmurs into cries for war. For the first time in decades, the people of Earth had something they had not dared hold on to: hope. And in the heart of the Empire's Grand Fleet, High General Varric read the reports with narrowed eyes. "This isn't possible," he muttered. Yet he knew deep down the truth. A mistake had been made. The Empire had killed a woman, not realizing they had awakened something far worse. They had awakened Earth's most ruthless general, and he was coming for them. The city burned with a quiet desperation. Beneath the towering structures of New Bastion, the Empire's strongest outpost on Earth, the people moved like shadows, silent, hunched, their eyes empty. The streets were lined with banners bearing the sigil of the Galactic Empire, a constant reminder that their world no longer belonged to them. Patrols of armored soldiers walked the roads with practiced arrogance, their rifles slung lazily over their shoulders, knowing that fear alone kept the people in line. But fear had begun to crack. Whispers traveled faster than the wind. The name Adrian Kane, once a myth, a story told in secret, now carried weight again. Some dismissed it as another false hope, a desperate lie spread by the resistance. But others, those who had seen the remains of the slaughtered Imperial patrol outside the ruins, knew better. A ghost had returned, and with him, the promise of war. Hashtag, 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 the general's awakening. Far from the city's prying eyes, Adrian Kane stood at the heart of a hidden rebel stronghold, deep within the ruins of an old industrial sector. The rebels, ragtag survivors of past skirmishes and dreamers clinging to the last remnants of defiance, watched him with a mixture of awe and apprehension. Kane was not the man they had imagined. His presence was formidable, his movements precise, but the weight of a century in stasis still clung to him. His body ached with disuse. His mind fought to the haze of lost time. Yet his voice, when he finally spoke, was like steel, sharp and unyielding. "You've wasted years fighting like insects," Kane said, his eyes scanning the room filled with makeshift weapons and outdated tactics. "Raiding convoys, bombing outposts, annoyances. That's all you've been." One of the rebels, a broad-shouldered man named Joran, stepped forward. "And what would you have us do?" he asked, his tone edged with defiance. "March into the Imperial citadel and declare victory?" Kane met his gaze, unreadable. "Something like that." The room fell into uneasy silence. Some laughed, but the seasoned fighters did not. They recognized something in Kane's tone, a certainty, an authority that only a true warrior possessed. Kane exhaled, steadying himself. His muscles were weak, but his mind, his instincts, they were waking up. You fight in the shadows because you believe you are weak. You are not. The Empire is vast, but it is not invincible. I know their tactics. I know their weaknesses. And I know how to break them. A voice spoke up from the back. "And what do you want in return?" Kane turned. The speaker was a young woman, no older than 20, her face hardened by struggle. She reminded him of Lena Valdez. "I want the same thing you do," Kane said. "A free Earth." Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag the Empire reacts. Deep within the Imperial flagship Dominion, High General Varric read the latest reports, his expression carefully neutral. His officers stood at attention, waiting for his response. The name Adrian Kane was spread across every datapad. Sightings, rumors, a dozen dead soldiers outside the ruins. It was all impossible. Varric clenched his jaw. "Kane is dead." One of his lieutenants shifted uneasily. "The reports say otherwise, sir." Varric's fingers curled into a fist. "If he truly lives, then we have made a grave mistake." The room was silent. No one dared speak. Finally, Varric exhaled, straightening. "Deploy the Eclipse Legion to New Bastion. Increase patrols. And find Kane." His voice darkened. "Before the people start believing in him." Hashtag, 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 a war begins. Back at the rebel hideout, Kane wasted no time. His mind worked like a machine, assessing, calculating, rebuilding. The rebels had numbers, but they lacked training. They had passion, but no strategy. That was where he came in. The training was brutal. Kane pushed them to their limits, drilling them in formations, tactics, and discipline. He taught them how to move like soldiers, not scavengers. How to think beyond desperation. "We do not fight because we are angry," he told them one night as they gathered around a dim fire, exhaustion weighing heavy on them. "We fight because we refuse to kneel." The first real test came sooner than expected. An Imperial transport, carrying supplies and weapons, was scheduled to pass through the ruins at dawn. A routine mission. The kind of thing the Empire never worried about, which made it the perfect target. Kane led the strike himself. No reckless charges. No wasted movement. They hit fast, precise. His fighters moved as he had trained them. Silent, efficient, merciless. The ambush lasted 3 minutes. The Empire never saw it coming. When it was over, the rebels stood over a hall of Imperial-grade weapons, stunned by their own success. For the first time, they had won not by luck, but by skill. Kane surveyed them, his gaze unreadable. This is just the beginning. And deep inside, he knew the truth. The war for Earth had begun. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag a storm on the horizon. News of the ambush spread quickly. The Empire, furious at the sudden shift in resistance tactics, responded with brutal crackdowns. Civilians were arrested in mass sweeps. Suspected rebels were executed without trial. The message was clear: submit or be crushed. But the people had seen something they had not in years. Victory. Kane had done more than train fighters. He had given them proof that the Empire could bleed. That night, in the heart of New Bastion, a child picked up a piece of chalk and, on the cold steel of an Imperial checkpoint, wrote 4 words before disappearing into the crowd. "Kane lives. Earth fights." High General Varric read the report hours later, his face betraying no emotion. But inside he felt it. For the first time in years, the Empire was afraid, and fear was the first sign of defeat. The air in New Bastion had changed. It was no longer weighed down by silent submission. It crackled with something unseen, but undeniable. Fear still loomed, but it was no longer the people's burden to bear. It belonged to the Empire now. The name Adrian Kane had transcended whispers. It had become a battle cry. What began as isolated skirmishes had turned into a coordinated uprising. Imperial patrols disappeared into the ruins and never returned. Convoys were ambushed with surgical precision, leaving wreckage and flames in their wake. The rebels, once scattered and desperate, had transformed into something far more dangerous. An army. But the Empire would not be broken so easily. And Kane knew the storm was coming. Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag the Empire strikes back. Deep in the command chamber of the Dominion, High General Varric studied the holographic map of Earth, his expression carved from stone. Red markers blinked over key cities, indicating insurgent activity. The spread of the rebellion was unlike anything the Empire had faced before. This was not random resistance. This was war. Varric turned to his officers, his voice calm but edged with warning. The rebels think they won a victory. They mistake our silence for weakness. His eyes darkened. Let's remind them who we are. That night, the Empire responded. Legions of black-armored stormtroopers swept through the slums, dragging suspected rebels into the streets. Civilians were lined up against walls and executed without trial. Imperial dreadnoughts hovered over cities, their cannons raining destruction on neighborhoods suspected of harboring insurgents. By dawn, the streets of New Bastion were slick with blood. The message was clear. The Empire did not negotiate. The Empire did not fear ghosts. Asterisk, asterisk. But Kane had not come back to negotiate. Hashtag, 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 a desperate gamble. Kane stood in the underground war room, his gaze fixed on the hollow map flickering before him. Red indicators marked Imperial outposts, patrol routes, and reinforcement deployments. The enemy was tightening its grip, hoping to crush the rebellion before it could fully rise. He traced a scarred finger along the glowing map, stopping at a blinking blue, a single beacon of hope in a sea of red. New Bastion's primary command center, a fortress buried deep in the city's heart, reinforced with shields and guarded by an elite garrison. It was the Empire's nerve center on Earth. If they could strike there, they wouldn't just wound the enemy. They would cripple it. Kane turned to the gathered commanders. Jorn was there, his arms crossed, face grim. Beside him stood Sarah Voss, the young rebel who had first questioned Kane's motives. Now, she was one of his most trusted fighters. "This is suicide," Jorn muttered, shaking his head. "That place is impenetrable." Kane's expression didn't waver. "Nothing is impenetrable." Sarah frowned, studying the map. "Even if we breach the outer defenses, we don't have the numbers for a prolonged battle." Kane nodded. "We won't need one." He gestured to a blinking secondary marker, the underground transport tunnels. Forgotten by most, these ancient passages had once been a vital part of Earth's infrastructure before the Empire deemed them unnecessary. But Kane remembered them well. "We infiltrate through the tunnels," he continued. "Strike from within. Take the command center before they know what's happening." His gaze swept over the room. "We cut off the head and the body falls apart." Jorn exhaled, rubbing his temples. "And if we fail?" Kane met his gaze. "Then we die fighting for something greater than ourselves." The room fell silent. Then Sarah stepped forward. "When do we move?" Hashtag, hashtag, hashtag the battle for New Bastion. The attack began under the cover of darkness. Kane led the infiltration team to forgotten tunnels, their footsteps barely audible over the distant hum of the city above. The air was thick with dust, the scent of rust and decay lingering in the abandoned corridors. When they finally reached the underground access point beneath the command center, Kane signaled a halt. He pressed a gloved hand against the cold steel of the blast door, feeling the hum of security systems buried within. 5 guards, 2 stationed at the inner checkpoint, 1 monitoring the security feed, 2 patrolling the corridors. Asterisk, asterisk. He could take them in under 30 seconds. With a flick of his hand, he gave the order. The rebels moved like ghosts, slipping into the enemy's stronghold. Blades flashed in the dim light. Silenced weapons whispered death. By the time the first alarm sounded, it was already too late. The rebels were inside. Explosions tore through the upper levels as Kane's secondary strike team engaged the outer defenses, drawing Imperial forces away from the command center's core. The corridors became a battlefield of smoke and blood as the rebels pushed forward, fighting with the precision Kane had drilled into them. Varric's forces responded with brutal efficiency. Elite Imperial guards poured into the hallways, their black armor glinting under flickering emergency lights. Plasma fire turned the corridors into a storm of death. Rebels fell. Soldiers collapsed. The walls were painted in shadows and flame. And then, Kane reached the control chamber. The blast doors groaned as they were forced open. Inside, a squad of Imperial officers scrambled to arm themselves, but Kane moved first. A knife to the throat, a rifle wrenched from trembling hands. For men fell before the others realized they were already dead. Kane turned to the central command console. With a few keystrokes, he accessed the facility's defense grid. the city shields, the troop deployment records. And then he did something the Empire never expected. He shut everything down. Across New Bastion, Imperial defenses flickered and died. Shield generators powered down. Automated turrets froze. The city, once an impenetrable fortress, was suddenly exposed. The rebels outside saw their chance. They struck with everything they had. Hashtag the Dual Titans. In the chaos of the collapsing command center, Kane felt the presence before he saw it. A heavy footstep, a familiar scent of polished steel and old blood. Then the voice. You should have stayed buried. Kane turned. High General Varric stood at the entrance, his massive form silhouetted by the burning corridor behind him. His obsidian armor gleamed with the reflections of fire and death, his crimson cloak billowing in the heated air. He carried no rifle, no sidearm, only a single plasma forged blade, glowing with a cold, unnatural light. Kane exhaled. He rolled his shoulders, flexing his hands. I thought you would be taller, he said. Varric's lips curled into something that wasn't quite a smile. Then he lunged. The two titans clashed in a storm of steel and fury. Varric's strikes were relentless, each one powerful enough to break bone. Kane met them with precision, turning force into opportunity. Sparks flew as their blades clashed. Every movement was calculated, every feint a deadly trap. But Kane was not the man he once was. Time had weakened him. A misstep, a fraction of a second too slow. Varric's blade pierced Kane's side. Pain lanced through him, hot and blinding. He staggered but refused to fall. Varric sneered. You are not a god, Kane. You are just a man. Kane gritted his teeth, gripping his knife. Then I'll kill you like one. With a sudden burst of movement, he drove his blade into Varric's shoulder, twisting it deep. The general roared, staggering back. They were both wounded now, both bleeding, and the battle was far from over. The command center burned around them. Smoke curled through the air, thick with the scent of scorched metal and blood. Fires raged unchecked in the corridors where rebels and Imperials had clashed. The distant echoes of battle still thundered beyond the walls. But in the heart of the chamber, there were only two men left standing. Adrian Kane, High General Varric. Both were wounded. Both were bleeding. But neither would fall. Kane's side throbbed where Varric's plasma blade had struck him, the searing pain threatening to cripple him with every breath. Yet his grip on his knife remained firm, his stance unwavering. Varric, too, bore the weight of their duel. Kane's blade was still buried in his shoulder, dark crimson staining the black of his armor. But the general only smiled, a cold, ruthless thing that spoke of a lifetime spent in war. You fight well, Varric admitted, shifting his grip on his sword. For a relic. Kane exhaled sharply, adjusting his stance. You talk too much. Then they lunged. Hashtag the final clash. Steel met steel in a blinding flurry of strikes. Varric pressed forward with brute strength, forcing Kane onto the defensive, their blades flashing between them like lightning. Kane ducked, pivoted, narrowly dodging a strike aimed to end him. His body screamed in protest, weakened by time, by wounds, but he did not stop. He could not stop. The rebellion was at its tipping point. If he fell here, if he lost, everything that fought for, everything Lena had died for, would be gone. A feint, a twist. Kane turned Varric's own momentum against him, sidestepping at the last moment and driving his elbow into the general's wounded shoulder. Varric grunted in pain, staggering back. Kane didn't hesitate. He struck. His knife found its mark, slamming into the chink between the plates of Varric's armor, just beneath the ribs. He twisted the blade deep, feeling the shudder in the general's body. Varric's breath hitched. His sword clattered to the ground. For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. You, he rasped, choking on blood. You think this changes anything? Kane met his gaze, expression unreadable. It already has. With a final wrench of his blade, he pulled free. Varric staggered, his strength failing him. He dropped to his knees, his once mighty frame collapsing beneath its own weight. For a long moment, neither man spoke. Then, with a hollow exhale, High General Varric fell. Hashtag the collapse of an empire across New Bastion. Imperial forces felt the shift before they understood it. The command center was lost. Their leader was dead, and Kane had made sure the entire city knew it. Through hacked Imperial frequencies, a single message played across every screen, every communicator, every system still under the Empire's control. Kane's voice strong, unwavering. The Empire is not invincible. The war is not over. But today, Earth fights back. Rebels surged through the city with renewed fury. The streets became battlegrounds, Imperial defenses crumbling as their chain of command unraveled. Some soldiers surrendered. Others fled. Asterisk, those who remained loyal fought, but it was a battle they had already lost. By dawn, the banner of the Galactic Empire had been torn from the Citadel, and in its place, Earth's flag flew once more. Hashtag the cost of freedom. Kane stood atop the wreckage of the command center, watching as the city stirred with newfound life. The people had risen. The enemy had fallen. But the war was not over. He turned as Sarah Voss approached, her uniform stained with dust and blood. Her eyes, once shadowed with doubt, were now sharp with determination. "It's done," she said, though she didn't sound relieved. "New Bastion is ours." Kane exhaled, feeling the weight settle on his shoulders. For now, Joran joined them, arms crossed. "We'll need to act fast. The Empire won't let this stand. They'll send reinforcements." "They will," Kane agreed. He looked out the horizon, where Imperial ships still hovered in the distance, unsure whether to advance or retreat. The Galactic Empire was vast, and Earth was still just one planet in a conquered galaxy. But something had changed. They had proven that the Empire could bleed. That resistance was not futile. That Earth was not broken. The first battle had been won, but the war had only just begun. Hashtag a warrior's legacy. Later that night, beneath the ruins of the city, Kane stood before a quiet grave. Lena Valdis. He ran a hand over the rough stone, his mind heavy with memories of her, the woman who had died fighting for a world that had forgotten him. "They will come for us," he murmured. "The fight isn't over." He looked up at the stars, where the Empire's fleet still loomed, waiting. Then he smirked. "Let them come."